And with that, it's time to introduce our next presenter on today's Data Protection EcoCast. That is Mr. Mike Lyon, Product Manager at Scale Computing. Mike, are you there?
Yeah, I sure am. How are you doing today?
Doing great, Mike. Thanks for joining us. Take it away.
Well, thanks for having me. My name is Mike Lyon. So I focus really on our managed service provider offerings as well as our cloud integrations and disaster recovery and data protection. So talking today, that was a great first presentation, and I think this is going to dovetail nicely into it. Talking about data protection for hyperconverged infrastructure. Now, a lot of these concepts are going to be mostly common sense, but as HCI, hyperconverged infrastructure, really becomes the next new paradigm in the data center and becomes more widely adopted, we're going to talk about some of the features we have, but that are also really should be just kind of level, common features across all platforms to optimize your data protection. But just a quick bit about us. The word hyperconverged infrastructure, HCI, we actually defined and came up with that term, and there have been a lot of other vendors in the market who have helped to bring it to life, but really it's been in our DNA, and we designed a product that was designed to be simple, fault-tolerant, highly available, without having to put the expertise in managing a SAN or having to deal with farms of servers and blades underneath. We really wanted to have really the cloud-like experience, which is why we virtualized in the first place, right? To just deploy a virtual machine, because that's the atomic unit of the data center today, without having to worry about the composite underneath infrastructure. We work with some top-end technology partners, and lately with Intel and Lenovo. So as the other major transition is happening in the computing world, and we hear about edge computing, really, we've talked about that for a while, and we've called it distributed enterprise. But whether it's in the data center, outside the data center, at the edge, the data protection needs are really the same, and in fact, in some cases, they're more significant. Just going back, we've been around for 11 years, and we actually launched our HCI product in 2012. But starting in 2017, we made some significant investments in our core products, kind of to address some of the needs of the additional threat vectors that have been coming into the market. Mostly ransomware has become a significant problem. But as the market for infrastructure changed, the data protection needs changed as well. So we work with both our core products as well as integrating some other partnerships in there, including Google for a cloud-based DR, as well as Unitrends. So again, just the quick, boring definition: hyperconverged infrastructure is not a hyperbole of converged infrastructure. It was really meant to define the hypervisor and the storage converged into one layer. You're not presenting your storage through a traditional SAN. You're not doing it through a VSA where you virtualize the SAN. Really is connecting the compute layers and the storage layers directly. And that's really where the term was designed to be focused around. And really we wanted to simplify what we have today, where when you're deploying a traditional virtualization infrastructure, you've got physical hosts, we call it 3-2-1, but we talk about 3 physical hosts, 2 SANs, for redundancy, and then a network layer on top of that. But you have the complexity of protecting, supporting, and updating all those individual components in the stack. And sometimes you can't always do all that at once. So what we wanted to do was simplify it, and again, provide that, as I say, cloud-like simplicity, but it's in your own data center. And focusing on, the availability part of it, not just having, disaster recovery features built in, but also mitigating the risks ahead of time and having the intelligence to know when there's impending failures or getting your data set to be protected. And as we talk about the edge, the 4 walls of the data center, as everyone says, are being broken. And as components in the infrastructure get pushed out to smaller and smaller form factors, really as IoT explodes, again, there's all that data out there that needs to be protected and secured. And that's really where it's important to have a good data protection strategy at every layer of your infrastructure. And regardless of how small or large the deployment is, There's sensitive data, and someone's going to want to get access to it. And just recently, just a quick shameless plug, we did finally unseat VMware for the top vendor virtualization, and then as well for the HCI vendor, finally beating out some of the other bigger names there. But just getting into it, to build on what we were talking about earlier, overall, data protection and DR strategies. And at today's common level, we'll just look at the VM. Everyone has local snapshots. There's the ability to replicate those snapshots off to a remote site or a remote cloud, or maybe even keep a local copy of those snapshots. Maybe it's off on a different system, different storage. But really, it's a data protection suite that you would want to have built in. And going beyond the VM level, you have to be able to get access to the files. You have to be able to, avoid and overcome stupid user tricks without having to go through a full disaster recovery scenario. And ideally, at the VM level, and integrated into that platform, there shouldn't be any additional licensing, right? At the VM level, being able to take snapshots and use those as a recovery point gives you protection against ransomware. It gives you a failback to go back for patch management. But having all these built into one platform is really a unique opportunity, or even being able to ship it off to a cloud provider, whether it's Google or another provider. If you're just doing archival for cold storage, maybe you have retention needs that are saying, okay, I've got to keep this data for 7 to 10 years. I don't need this on local disk. It can just go live in Glacier. So, the strategy that you have for your core infrastructure should be able to have diversity to reach out to multiple forms of media. And as I talked about before with that 3-2-1 model, that's really where you need to be thinking about having diversification and where your data is residing, the type of media it's being resided on, as well as who can access it and how can it get accessed. Is this user data that's going to be needed to be presented through a VPN, or again, is this just archival and backup? And then integrating in with a third-party option. Are you going to be able to utilize, if you're doing a forklift upgrade, you've got an incumbent infrastructure that's certainly got lifespan left in it. That's a perfect way to leverage, a Unitrend to take advantage of long-term archival with your own local storage, or being able to offload that and offshore that to another cloud if you want. That's taking advantage of, their technology and our technology to get object-level recovery, being able to pull database records out, restore an Exchange mailbox, Office 365, and then to give you options to restore to other platforms. So when you take, the holistic approach of your core infrastructure, an HCI platform, whether it's Scale or whomever, you have to be able to replicate, you have to be able to snapshot those VMs and move those off. But to get access to the more granular objects, to the more important day-to-day recovery options, that's where you need to have the ability to get recovery out to other platforms, and you really need to have your recovery times in seconds when it's filed. Users are having those expectations that it's not going to be a day-long tape retrieval to get their file back, whereas, I needed to bring up a corrupted VM. That's understand where it maybe takes a couple of hours, but having the file level and object level recovery is really where a third-party integration gives you a lot more flexibility. And going down into a smaller form factor, a different footprint, the idea of a cluster always provides you fault tolerance and high availability. You can do things like rolling updates, but sometimes there's a need for just in a disaster recovery form factor. I don't need to have a full cluster's worth of resources. I don't need that level of fault tolerance because this is a lifeboat scenario. So being able to deploy a single server or a single node really gives you some flexibility in expanding your DR options, expanding your backup options, and it even becomes a DevOps extension. You can use it as a place to stage patches, test deployments. It's not just another extension of the distributed enterprise or having a remote office. Using a single node deployment as a full backup target really gives you some flexibility. And again, that's not going to be a universal option, but if you're just looking for deep and cheap file retention, and again, you don't want it to go in a cloud, you need to have physical tactile access to that. Using a single node or a storage-only option really gives you that ability to do that. And then, so what if you need to go back and protect that up to the cloud? The advantages of cloud providers for backup really are, it gives you flexibility in paying. You're not committing to a significant amount of resources that you may or may not need, especially in a DR scenario. That's really where the cloud is ideal for, because you're only going to be paying for workloads that you'd be running in an actual disaster. You can back up and protect those, but you're only going to be paying in on-demand. With a consumption-based model, it makes that far easier. And it works the same way if you're not doing VMs, if you're just doing data. Again, with transactional-based storage pricing, you can store hundreds of terabytes at a fraction of the cost per month with the understanding you're probably not going to ever need to retrieve that data, but it's there. You're meeting your governance or other compliance or regulatory requirements that are mandating you to keep it, but you're not wasting expensive on-premises or other, high-tiered storage just to store archival data. So with, for scale with us, with Cloud Unity, one of the things we're able to do with cloud is use nested virtualization. Google and Azure both have the capability. We've currently only deployed this with Google, but really to be able to virtualize your infrastructure and run a virtual cluster in the cloud. So you're actually running virtual machines on a virtual machine, but that gives you the ability to seamlessly protect your VMs without having to understand how do I get that ground to cloud networking plumbing stack done, how do I get everything connected. Really gives you the ability to extend your DevOps environment or provide some staging areas. And also without having to, again, understand and go to a 5-week class on understanding VPC networks or how do I get my VPN connected. Having that networking built in really is a nice feature. Just to kind of expand on how we work with the Unitrends, and again, if you look at what we do for our data protection, and this is something that should be in every HCI platform, is protecting the VM. Being able to provide a snapshot and a stateful recovery of that VM at its level. And that's great for, again, corruption or staging or patches, but it's not always ideal for being able to just recover a file. It's a little bit more cumbersome for that. So if you need that granular object level recovery, using the agents built in with UEB, that gives you the ability to, again, grab those files, go back and reach into snapshots, go back and reach into specific files and get them back up in seconds without having to look at the more holistic approach of I need to recover the whole VM. So the other risk factors as far as, when I'm applying updates, and I think a lot of us tend to avoid updates even when they're security focused because of the complexity involved. What is this update going to affect? Is it going to affect anything else in my stack? Am I going to violate an HCL? And that's really one of the more important things is providing a platform that makes it easy and really thoughtless to be able to update it without having to worry about taking maintenance windows, without having to worry about maintenance mode or hardware compatibility. Being able to update your system for when the next Spectre 3 or Spectre 4 patch comes out. That's another part of data protection, is being able to provide the ability to seamlessly and really easily update and patch your system without having to worry about the impact it's going to have on your organization. Because I think we tend to avoid or even stack up significant amounts of change for a change window or a maintenance window, and have some adverse consequences if there's an issue when you have to go back and unwind through the stack. Okay, where did things go wrong? So again, talking about the snapshots, one of the things that is unique to us, you think about snapshots with other virtualization platforms, they tend to be a little scary, I guess, as far as keeping a queue of snapshots. Part of what makes us unique is our storage layer. So there's not a virtual disk representation of a VM. So there would never be an opportunity where someone could hijack your VMDKs or whatever. When you create a VM and you create a disk, it's actually distributed in writing all to the block devices in a cluster. So there's no file anywhere. But because of that, we're only looking at the 1 meg blocks inside of a virtual disk. So we can take thousands of snapshots, and really we're only tracking the difference. And you need to go back. It takes a few seconds. You can just pick a specific point in time and clone a snapshot. You're not going to have to worry about this queue of allocations rights and how that's going to affect the other snaps. And there's also not a chain of dependency or a lineage you have to remember if you need to purge snapshots. But that's giving you that, again, at VM level instant failback. And also being able to schedule them, just like a backup product where you need to be able to specify your intervals and backup types, as well as your retention, being able to schedule at the VM level to meet your needs. Again, built in and easy to do. So yeah, with those VM snaps, whether it's local or remote, if the VM is replicated, it just takes a few seconds to pick a point in time snapshot, and you've got an identical copy of that VM. The other thing that's unique about it is because it's a clone from that parent VM, there's not going to be any additional space that's taken up really until you turn that VM on and it starts to consume swap or virtual memory. But it's a thin clone, so it's not going to consume a significant amount of space or resources. And then again, you can blow it away as soon as you're done with it. But just like you need to replicate and protect your files and get them off-site, having the ability to replicate your VMs to another cluster, to the Google Cloud, that's a way to give you more diversity in your protection and ensure that you've got off-site copies of your data. So whether that's a different building across campus, a different building across town, or a cloud, using those snapshot-based backups really is going to give you the ability to have a holistic overall approach. And then at the VM level, there's a point where I also going to need to have archives. If I need to have a stateful copy of the VM at a point in time, or maybe I just need to move that VM and test it on a different hypervisor. I don't want to feel like I'm locked in, and that's something that's also unique with us is you can export a VM and you're going to get a basic XML and disk copy. But what that also gives you the ability is to say, okay, I've got a time capsule of these template VMs, or maybe they're archive copies you need to store, being able to get those VMs off. It also gives you the ability to, again, if you wanted to import that into another hypervisor or, run it on VDI for testing. You can use, really just write to any CIF share, whether that's local or in the cloud, and you get a full universal copy of the VM back. And really, as far as the backup process and how it is to set up, having everything built in and integrated makes it easy for us to be able to make it a turnkey solution. The process of setting up a cluster, I actually did a Spiceworks live broadcast where I did it in under 30 minutes from the rack and stack, rather than, a 20 to 40 hour deployment just to get to the point where you can actually log in and create VMs. The backup process is just as easy because you're just pointing your local cluster to the remote IP address of, that single node, another cluster, or if it's a Google Cloud address. Again, because of the way we're handling storage at the block level, it's incredibly space efficient. So in a DR, or if you're just doing a testing, when you've run that workload at the remote site, you can replicate it back and rolling the track and need to send back the changed blocks from whatever occurred during the time that VM was running remotely. Again, that's at a 1 meg block level, so it's fairly space efficient. But again, not always a disaster. Going back into the file level, we can go back into snapshots and pick an individual volume from a snap and restore that. Again, you'll be able to access that VM disk, pull the files out if you need to. This is where, again, we'd want to have a tie-in with someone like a Unitrends to be able to do catalog indexing back. But at the core product, you would be able to also pull the individual VM disks out. So again, remote full VM recovery, local full VM recovery, and giving you the ability to simplify and with a couple clicks actually go through a full DR orchestration without having to worry about the ramifications of hitting that big red button and how is that going to affect your environment. And then it's important to, whether it's through your partner or an internal team, you should really have a DR runbook in place today, and that can be a couple of bullet points. It needs to be something that's transient, that's not owned by any one individual, but it needs to be something that's facilitated and tested. Your vendors can help you set that up. We offer that. That's really an important part of your overall strategy, is having it documented and having it on paper, something you can refer back to, and not something you draft up once as a task that say, okay, let's set it and forget it, but something that really is a living document that's a vital part of your infrastructure. So with that, I can open it up to any questions we have.
Yeah, great presentation, Mike. We do have some questions for you. While we do that, I'm just going to bring up this poll question for the audience. We'll just leave that up while we do some Q&A. It says, what additional information would you like about the scale computing solution? So if you don't mind answering that, everyone out there in the audience, we appreciate it. Mike, I assigned some questions to you there in the queue. Let's see, first one, I guess, that catches my eye, but feel free to bring up, any that catch your eye as well. They're asking about what hypervisor scale computing uses in the cluster.
KVM.
Okay.
Yeah, so we've built our product around KVM. Yep.
Very nice. And Chris is asking, is Unitrends today the only third-party solution that works with scale computing for data protection?
No. We have partnerships with Acronis and ArcServe as well. But we've got probably the Unitrends is certainly our biggest.
Okay. And then let's see, another question here is about what features are required to enable the replication on the scale cluster?
So you only really need to have connectivity between the two clusters, so or a single node. So it's actually already built in. There's nothing that needs to be enabled. You just have to have, there's a specific port we require to have connectivity between the sites. But as long as that port's open, they can just connect directly.
Okay. And one of the things that I seem to recall about Scale is that when you buy the cluster, you essentially get the software and all the features that go with it. Is it true that there aren't different editions of the software?
Correct. Yeah, that's always been that way. As we push out new features, they're always included. But yeah, there's only one overarching version of the software, and that also gives us the ability to, create hybrid clusters. So you're not locked into a single form factor or family. They're always compatible with other nodes.
Yeah, I heard it compared to like the iPhone analogy. You get a new iPhone, say software upgrade, and it's just included. You don't have to buy a different edition. You don't have to pay to upgrade it, kind of thing. It's the new features
Exactly.
Just come with it. Yeah, I like that analogy. Another question here: can you replicate and protect a whole cluster to a single node? Is that possible?
Yes, it's really a matter of resources. So, if you have a larger, and you can get a large single node that outmatches the capacity of your primary cluster. So yeah, we've got enough sizes to match that. So if you wanted to deploy a single node to protect a whole cluster, you could absolutely do that.
I like that. I bet that could help a lot of companies with their DR cost if they're struggling to afford a secondary site and a entire secondary cluster.
Yeah, and with Lenovo, we've come out with some tower form factors too. So even when there's environmental concerns or if there's not racks available, we've got some 8 and 12 drive tower nodes that are really affordable and provide, cheap and deep storage with full DR capabilities.
Oh, perfect for DR, yeah. Another question here is about the networking in Cloud Unity. How does that work? They're asking.
So we built in basically a service VM that actually builds a VXLAN tunnel between the cloud instance and the ground cluster. So again, there's no networking expertise required. You're just, again, pointing to the remote. You would just set it up as if you were setting up a ground cluster remotely. So we build in all the networking. And yeah, it's also all tunneled through Google's VPN.
Okay, very nice. Well, it looks like that's all the time we have in our live Q&A session here. I've assigned you some more technical questions, maybe in the queue if you don't mind getting back to those. But we got a lot of comments. Yep. It was a great presentation. Thanks for being on, Mike.
Thanks for having me.